I'm Dave Wiesdock, Sage of Creative Scaffolding.
And I'm Jen West, Professional Rebel of Delight.
And this is Shadowcasting. Welcome back, everybody. We're on another play mindset journey on Shadowcasting. Today is our third tool that we're going over. And today's tool is all about moving from fear to compassion through leaning into non-judgment. This is a big topic. I feel like we're finally starting to get into the meat of these tools. And before we continue on with this tool, since this is part of an ongoing series, I thought it'd be a good idea to recap what we've discussed, just give the highlights. As always, we really encourage you guys to go back and listen to the first few podcasts, so that way you get an idea of what we're discussing and give you some insight into how we got to this part of our play mindset. But without further ado, I'm going to let the author and creator of this tool start talking about some of what we've already discussed in previous weeks. So Jen, take it away.
Yeah, so let's recap play mindset. First, play is an acronym. It stands for a practice, probably the most important part, that it's a practice. It doesn't end. We just get better at it. So a practice that lights the way to the actions that help you become your best you. So it's play. And this comes from an idea I learned from James Carse on infinite and finite games. Our finite games are the ones that we play, board games, football games. They've got boundaries, they've got time limits, they've got rules that everybody has, distinct players, and they have an end time. There's a winner and a loser. Our infinite games are ones that have players that come and go, and the boundaries are flexible. And the main rule of the game is to try to keep playing the game. And so that's where play mindset came from. So the play mindset is built up on this idea that we are in one cycle or another cycle at any given time. And these two cycles are the survival cycle, where we're just trying to get through life and we seem to be stuck in the patterns of our life. We're just moving in a circle in the same fashion we always move in a circle. So we'll be on autopilot, fear, blaming our life. Our world is controlling us, and we drift as we go. And if we look back a few years, we're in the similar place that we are now. Maybe new relationships, but the same kind of things are happening. In the fulfillment cycle, we're growing, we're changing, we're enjoying our life and creating our life. We're aware of what's going on. We have compassion for ourselves and the people around us. We're taking responsibility and actions, and we're starting to have fun and look at the possibilities. We just start to create something new. So instead of being on a circle, we spiral outward, and our boundaries get bigger, and we can do more. That was the main theory, and we talked about it a lot deeper in our first podcast about play mindset. Then 2 episodes ago, our first tool was on discomfort and leaning into that and how that works for us. When we're thinking about the future, we can either be in anxiety because we're worried about what will go wrong, or we can be in more of an excitement stance. And it all comes from this discomfort and how we feel about the sensations in our body and the mental noise that creates. Then from there, we moved into a place of presence. So our third podcast on this was on presence. And that's moving from autopilot presence using the tool of awareness. And that one was really about waking up to ourselves and getting used to snapping out of autopilot. And we talked about the pros and cons of autopilot and how to use it, what it means to be present. And we gave people a challenge on both discomfort and awareness. And I'd like to say, for the audience members who have leaned into this series and you've leaned into discomfort and awareness, you might not be very happy with us right now, because maybe you're starting to see things. You're starting to recognize your resistance to discomfort and wanting to move back into comfort. You might be seeing more of your thoughts and the things you think and where you're coming from. And if you're actually feeling worse about everything after listening to these podcasts and you're not getting, excited and you're not feeling the presence is that great, it's okay. It's kind of the next step is learning how to lean into that and use our new tool, as Dave said, non-judgment.
Wow. Yeah, I think that was a really great way of not only bringing together the tools that we've already discussed, but also how they build on each other towards this next picture. And for the audience listening, there was also something else we discussed, which were these growth circles or comfort zones. And I think that not only plays really well with the tools that we've already discussed, but is a map, a guide, a contextual layer to how we navigate non-judgment as well. And I think you're going to see that come up again. So if you haven't had a chance to review those circles, I would highly encourage you to take a look at those when you get a chance. And keep in mind that both with the growth circles and with the survival and fulfillment cycle, because it is the infinite game, because this is based in play, you're going to move in and out of these. You're going to oscillate between them. While you begin to develop your tools of awareness and begin to lean into the discomfort and it gets a little muddy, or maybe you don't even really like what's coming up, those are your indicators that you're actually on the right track. When Jen said, you might not be happy with us, the first thought that came to mind was good.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's stepping into discomfort. That's why it was the first tool that we presented, because at first it's not going to be fun. It's hard to see more of ourselves and more of the thoughts and the things we don't want to be and the habits that we've created. And getting present wakes us up to the fact that we've been not really that present, not really that aware of what's going on in our lives, just that we've been a habit. And nobody likes to feel like they're just a habit.
No, or a robot, an automation. So when fear comes knocking and we're in that discomfort, the tool is moving through the guidance is to move through that. Like, that's how you know you're on the right track. And everything is transitory, right? Happiness, pain, fear, anxiety, comfort, discomfort. We're not in any one state 100% of the time. And when we can shine a light on those things that maybe make us do feel that discomfort, and we're willing to take a little bit of a leap of faith and move from that fear to being a little more compassionate with ourselves, that opens up the opportunity to go into those bigger circles of the learning and the growth zone. So I'm really excited to see how we can continue to prune or tune into our internal landscape a little more today. And this really recalls our first podcast, that idea of projecting our shadow outwardly. When we shadow cast, when we cast our shadows, both the comfort and the discomfort is shared outside of us. And we get to choose what that image looks like when it's projected. And the way that you do that is by leaning into the discomfort and working through these tools. So without further ado, I say we jump in and start with the first part of this tool, which is the fear.
Fear. And that plays right in with anxiety too. And we're going to, since it's another emotion, jump back into our bodies. When we feel fear, it's a contracting, a shrinking, a tightening of our focus so that we can fight or flight. It's very much a survival mechanism. And it's, of course, uncomfortable. So we want to get to safety as quickly as possible. And this when we have to step out, this when that discomfort and fear, we even talked about in our first podcast that it's attached to fear. But now we're actually working on it. So we feel the fear. The fear itself is discomfort. And we feel ourselves shrink and contract and our focus go down. And it's just a reaction.
Yeah. So fear is interesting because when I was growing up, when I would watch shows, fear was often characterized or a caricature of some sort in the cartoons. It was either this really timid energy or it was, like you said, this contracting. And as I've continued to do my own self growth and development, what I have found is that fear also shows up in my judgment. Fear is really rearing its ugly head for me when I get into my black and white, judgmental, this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad, very limited energy. And what I find is that there's often a trigger to that, a perceived threat or danger. And again, we talked about this in the previous podcast where that could be the lion chasing you, or it could be you got to give a speech and you don't like talking in front of people, and everything in between. What I really encourage our audience to do is not just look at fear from what you've been habitually or habitualized into thinking fear is, that it's this always this fearful energy. Fear comes up in a lot of ways. It can come up in our inner critic telling us we're not good enough to start that business. It can come up in our way we parent when we start judging ourselves. Did we parent the right way? And all those things are fear tapping our shoulder. And the reason it's fear is because it triggers, like we talked about, it triggers our sympathetic nervous system. It causes that increased heart rate, that rapid breathing, the muscle tension, the tightness. And we're faced, or we feel that we're only faced with one of three choices: face it, run, or I think there's a third one where you just sort of do nothing. It's a freeze response. That's what I'm thinking of. And fear gets this bad rap because we haven't been trained. We haven't taught ourselves. And it is a skill. You're not born with how to deal with fear. It's a skill that you develop. You learn how to have a different relationship with it. But the first part is just recognizing where fear shows up. And I think it's challenging when fear is only shown in one sort of light, but it does come up in these other ways with judgment and criticism and our inner critic and this right wrong mentality that we can get trapped in without even knowing it.
Yeah, it is very much a survival instinct, and it's meant to be reactionary. We have something come in on us, it feels like it's unsafe, and we react in the way that works best for us. That's why it's fight or flight or freeze. And as a human being who was raised in a place where those real big dangers aren't around, if you live in a war zone, there's real dangers. Those reactionary timings, super important. Use them. We want to react. We don't want to be thinking the good or bad as something bad is happening. Or if you hike in the woods and you do run into a bear, well, you probably don't want to attack or run. You actually do have to step back and think. But regardless, yeah, it's very much the reactionary. And looking at it from our human perspective and being an adult listening to this, our fear responses are based on when we were a kid. And it's what worked when we were small. So if it was to fight or cause conflict, that's going to be your natural tendency. Something's wrong. I need to defend myself. I'm going to lash out. If it wasn't safe to lash out and it was better to make peace, that might have been the freeze where you just stop and you pull back and you try to make peace with whatever's happening. A people pleaser, soothing people around you. It's a reaction that you had as a child to keep yourself safe. Or the third was the flee. Maybe things happened in your house, but not to you. And it was easier to disconnect, pull away, and flee from that chaos. And that's how you became safe. And so all of these tools were good tools. So we don't want to think that anything is bad in this instance. It's just what you learned to keep yourself safe when you had limited autonomy and limited power. And so it's just good to know that as we start this process. But now we're mature adults, and it's time for us to mature our tools. And this is where we start going.
Yeah. And this is a really meta way of looking at this because you're talking about judgment with non-judgment. It's kind of crazy. And
using the tool to talk about it. Yep.
Yeah, because you are right. It's not that this is why our habituated or rote response with fear isn't wrong. It's because it was there for a reason. And the only way we get out of that habit or pattern of behavior is when we're willing to look at it with that non-judgment. And I'm skipping ahead, but that's such a great point that you brought up. And I don't want to glaze over that the responses that we're talking about, we aren't talking about them as if they are wrong. We are coming from a compassionate point of view where we recognize why that response showed up in the first spot. And the problem is that we get so used to it that fear narrows our focus. And so we become polarized to our habits. We go, this instance is triggering me. And when this instance has happened in the past, this is how I respond. And I've obviously survived it because I'm still here now in this new instance. So let me do that again because I know that I will survive. And that goes back to the tool we talked about the last week, which is that awareness and that cognitive efficiency. It creates a loop for us so that way we can continue to survive. When we want to move into awareness and more presence, we have to move through and let go of those habits and patterns of behavior that continue to feed this response. And that's requires, again, going internally. So the fear isn't real. It's just a habituated response to the trigger that is happening around us. And when we lean into those patterns of behavior, which are a very real response, the fear wins. And so the idea is that we have to get back into the moment and either recognize that the fear is coming from some sort of past instance, or the fear could be this future ruminating, the worry, the anxiety. And the idea is that we want to move out from the past and the future and get back into the present.
Right. That's exactly it. And the fear, the way Dave said it, that it's not real, but the trigger is reminding you of how you dealt with stuff in the past. And it's an unconscious response. That's why it's not real. And I just did the not real in quotes because they're like, the body emotions are there. It is real. The external danger is what's not real. So the emotion of fear exists, but the trigger that caused it is causing an emotion that may not be the appropriate emotion. And this is the most interesting part of this particular tool. And I don't know if I said it already, but this tool and the next tool are the two hardest ones that anybody I've worked with have to wrap their mind around because the tool is non-judgment. And non-judgment gets corrupted to mean everything's okay. There's nothing that's right. There's nothing that's wrong. It's all permitted. And I just don't judge anything. I just sit back and let it happen. And that's not what it is. And we'll dive in more. But it's hard. It's really, really hard. But like that Dave said, I basically use the tool to speak about fear from a compassionate place. And that's what the tool will teach. And eventually you're in that compassion. You see somebody lash out at you because you said something and you're like, I didn't do anything and you're having a freak out at me. It's because of a pattern. And they're in their pattern. They're doing the thing that has always kept them safe. And once we know that, we have more compassion for them. We have more compassion for us. But it all starts with the step back into non-judgment. So should we talk about compassion next?
Yeah, let's do it. I think we've set it up. Now let's knock it down.
Yeah. So the compassion is that recognition. It's the empathy and the desire to alleviate that suffering, to alleviate what's causing the fear, the thing hidden behind it, the beliefs that we have. And the compassion first needs to come to ourselves because true compassion for others comes when we can actually give it to ourselves. And it's a motivation to help and to support and to offer kindness. It's an opening when we feel it. So in our body, fear is that contracting and that shrinking, but compassion is a releasing energy and opening up, accepting and almost, giving a hug. It's being open to what's coming and letting that happen. And when we can feel the contraction and be aware of it and not judge it, that compassion takes over. If you let it, if you don't judge what just happened, that contracting feeling, it'll open you up and it'll increase your well-being because you're not as tight and contracted and fearful. And it creates better relationships because you can communicate what just happened to you. It's the craziest thing. I've done it with my husband where he says something and I have a response that I contract and get tight. And I recognize it and I say, don't worry about it. Ignore that. I need to process what you asked of me. But that was just the response. That was just the triggered response. And I saw it and we're good. And he's looking, going, okay, very good. Let's talk about it now. And so you create stronger relationships and you get more connection because you can speak about the fear instead of being locked into it and reacting and running and fighting or freezing.
So when you're talking about this, Jen, what really comes to mind for me is that compassion is this antidote to limited thinking. And what I mean by that is when we lean into compassion, it opens us up to recognizing how human ourselves are. You brought up how when we might say something to someone and it triggers a response and you kind of recognize that it's not really about you. This happens a lot in professional and work settings. Someone will say, hey, I can't make this deadline. And you tell your boss and your boss just unloads on you and you recognize that what they're saying isn't even about the missed deadline. And it's this dissonance between what's going on and what's being said. And you recognize it's not about you. And while that is a great insight, the idea is that you're finding those instances, those dissonances within yourself, because the more you build compassion as a muscle for yourself, the more you have it for other people. And what ends up happening is that as you build compassion, what comes to mind for me is this growth mindset, this play mindset, right? The idea that everything in life is trial and error. I've talked about it on the podcast before. One of my hows is win or learn, never lose. It's not that I think that I can't lose or that I'm impervious to making mistakes. It's that I have compassion for myself, recognize that I'm human, and rather than beating myself up about things that I made a mistake on, I choose to learn from it. And rather than the fear of going, you're going to make that mistake again, you're going to F up again, I go, I'm human. And I can either beat myself up or I can choose to recognize that this is the infinite game and have infinite compassion for myself and choose to come at this from a different perspective. There isn't a right or wrong way. There's just simply choices and outcomes, cause and effect. And by sitting with our fear and our suffering, what ends up happening is we learn to lean into that, find better ways of things that work for us. And when we do that, that ripples outward. And that's the idea for me, is that by leaning into compassion and choosing better choices for myself, not only does that create better outcomes within my own sphere, but then that creates better outcomes for those around me as well. And you see this when you go to the coffee shop, for example, and the barista behind the counter has just waited on 13 people ahead of you, and you can just see that it's starting to weigh on them. You can either meet them where they're at, which is this icky, maybe downward energy, that sort of contracted energy that Jen was talking about, or you can have compassion for it. Who hasn't worked a job where you're just like, if one more person comes and talks to me, I'm just going to lose my mind, you know? When you start to have compassion for where people are at, because you have had compassion for yourself when you've been in that same situation, that's how we start to, and yes, you probably guessed it. I'm tagging this to our tagline. That's how you start to celebrate your humanity. It's not you go, oh, that person was just unloading on me and they're in a different world. No, it's that you recognize where they're coming from because you've seen it within yourself. You've seen it as that mirror and you've built and worked on and created the muscle of compassion for yourself so that you can have it for that person that's also going through that shared experience. So by sitting with it, we learn to allow others to do what works for them because we've had to learn to do what works well for us. And so that's why this is infinite game because it's not zero sum. It's not, oh, I figured out my compassion and now I got to go figure out the next thing. No, it's continual development and growth. And there's always that little nugget that you can find.
Yeah, and compassion, as you grow into it, it's an antidote to fear. Compassion builds courage because we know what it's like to be in the reactionary state. And 99.9% of people are not evil. You know, they just are doing the best they can with the patterns that they've created. And so we get courageous and we're more expansive and open and connected and empowered. And that opens other people up. Or if they do not want to open up, because some people aren't in that place and they're angry and fearful, they normally move on, they move away. But often our lightness and compassion is attractive. And it's like a moth to a flame. They want that energy of somebody who's secure in themselves and okay if they make mistakes and willing to learn from it. Compassion is a very powerful tool. And it helps us when we are in fear because we're compassionate to the fear we feel in our body. Because we've done the work, we know what it feels like inside. We've gotten presence where we can create that space. And now we can go, I see that. Yeah. And I understand that.
And I just want to hit on this too, is that we talked about fear taking you back to the past or putting you in the future and really taking you out of the present. And compassion acts as the lighthouse. It guides us back to the present moment, our inner self. And we still have to steer that boat. It's not just, oh, I have compassion for myself and therefore I am no longer judging me. Not quite. I wish it was that easy. But when we find the compassion, we've got to steer ourselves into the compassion. And so how do we do that? Well, we really do that through non-judgment. And
non-judgment is the tool.
Yeah. Compassion acts as the sort of beacon towards getting out of our fear and back to the present moment. And we get there, we steer through that in the boat of non-judgment. So let's talk about non-judgment.
Non-judgment is our tool or quality that we develop that moves us out of fear and into compassion. And the way that it works is once we've felt the discomfort and we've become present to the moment, it's seeing the moment as it is without giving it a black and white label, which as humans, we've been taught to say this is right and this is wrong. This is how you're supposed to be. This is how you're not supposed to be. This is good. This is evil. We have all of these dichotomies and our mind instantly makes meaning of everything we see. Mm-hmm. So we need that presence to notice our mind making that meaning. And non-judgment is the next tool. After we've seen that we've made meaning, it's stepping back from it and not judging that meaning, but recognizing that it's there. And then from that place, non-judgment, as I said at the beginning, most people take to mean, I don't judge anything. Nothing's right and wrong. There isn't a way you're supposed to go. Things just happen, and kind of nihilism. It doesn't matter what happens. It all sucks or it's all good. It's just whatever. And that's not what non-judgment brings us to. It opens us up to the context and the possibility of the moment. But we can't see that if we've already judged it as right or wrong.
All right, wait a minute. Say that again. That was a really It takes us to the context and the possibility of the moment.
Yeah.
Because I think what you're getting to with that is discernment, right?
Right. Yeah. We can't make a choice on something we've already judged as good or bad. But if we cannot judge that situation, if we can see it for what it is in the context it's in, this is the most important part, because something can be good in one context and very wrong in another context. If we have a right and wrong, somebody can yell. And if you have a belief system that yelling is wrong and mean and cruel, then if they yell for a good reason, you take it as wrong and mean and cruel. And maybe there's a reason, there is a good reason to raise your voice and to yell. And it's okay to be angry. And so learning the context of when it's okay and when it's not, that takes a lot of non-judgment to sit back and be like, is this appropriate in this moment?
Yeah. I mean, I'd even take that analogy one step further. I'd say anytime someone has a raised voice, even if they're speaking from excitement, maybe it's exciting yelling. If you've already judged or you're already in something where a raised voice means you're not safe, maybe, for example, it doesn't matter what the energy or emotion or context of it is. If you are in that a loud voice that equals bad, you're not in compassion, you're not in non-judgment. And that's really tough. Yeah. Really tough.
Yeah, you're in the fear of I'm not safe. And so you're wrong. It's not right to raise your voice.
And really leaning into the play mindset as a cycle, as a tool, as a system, as a mindset. If we go back a couple tools, why? Oh, like, is it fear? Is it autopilot? Are you just used to when you hear that loud voice, you're just on autopilot and you go, yep, that's a bad voice. I'm going the other way. Maybe not physically, maybe mentally, maybe internally. You shut down, you tune out. I'd like to share another example, though, if it's okay, in the context of this, where maybe it's a little softer of an example. I was practicing a mindfulness exercise the other day, and I was reading it through a book. So it was something that was happening in real time. And the author talks about following your breath, following the inhale, following the exhale. And it's really as simple as directions as that. Follow the inhale as far as it'll go inside, follow the exhale as far as it'll go outside. And what happens is as you're following your in breath, as you're following your out breath, you're following it as far as it'll go. And instinctively, as I started doing this exercise, I was going into a sort of boxed breathing technique where I was inhaling for 4, maybe holding for 4 and breathing out for 4, some similar cadence. And as I read the exercise and practiced it, I continued into the book, and the author mentioned how concentrating on my breath and concentrating on the beats per breath was actually defeating the whole purpose of the exercise, because I was trying to control or force my own thoughts onto what the exercise needed to be, when in all reality, the idea was if I was breathing fast or slow, shallow or deep, I needed to just be where the breath was. And that was really hard because I was coming from this autopilot mindset of, oh, if I'm practicing my breathing and practicing being mindful, I have to breathe this certain way. But the minute I got into that, it took me out of the present moment. And so when I brought myself back to the present moment, back to non-judgment, and just allowed myself to breathe however I was breathing at the time, that was a really cool experience because I was really present and I wasn't forcing myself to breathe a certain way. And I ended up breathing really fast and really shallow because that's just where I was in that moment, and being okay with that. because oftentimes when you read about breathing fast and shallow, that means that you're not really in a meditative or relaxed state. And so my brain was like, oh, you're not relaxing, Dave. You're not meditating. You're not being mindful. But I was
You're
actually
not doing it right.
right. I'm not doing it right. I was in judgment. And what's crazy is when I got into non-judgment and just allowed my breath to be what it was, I was actually more in my mindfulness than I was when I was trying to create it, as I put that in air quotes. And I think for me, taking away all those qualifiers, what comes up is that this is non-judgment in action. Non-judgment in action is deciding what works for you in the moment and not judging what it could have been or what you think it needs to be. And that's a really, really hard skill to develop. And I think that's why this tool is so powerful at the same time. This is just a really cool tool. And what the example showed me is by learning to focus on where my breath was, I was able to come from a space of compassion and non-judgment rather than creating the environment I thought I needed to be in that space.
It's a different space to be in when you move from non-judgment because you were in a place where you knew what your breath wanted to do at this point, and it wanted to be short and shallow. Now, taking away the judgment of that being wrong, you now have choices. In this particular meditation you were doing, you were supposed to leave it alone and observe. That was the goal of that. In that context, if your breath is short and shallow, it's short and shallow. Just watch it breathe. In another context, maybe you would want to take charge of it and see if you could extend it or pay attention to a different part of your body to see if you could drop it and lengthen it. But it depends on the context and what your goal is and what your outcome is. And ironically, if you allow your breath to be shallow, it'll fix itself. We don't need to get in there. You just got to be patient and let it sort itself out. And we can also use this going back to the person who yells and that intense energy being desperately uncomfortable and creating the fear that makes us want to fight or freeze, because for that particular person, loud voices is dangerous. When we can first step back and be like, this scares me, and not judge that fear and not judge the thought that says, I need to run or I need to fight. We open ourselves up first to, is that true? And we can take in the context and decide, no, they're yelling because that football team just scored a goal and they just have this big energy and that scared me, but they didn't do anything wrong. We start to get present and we start to get true and we start to rewire when fear activates. You know, somebody's right in our face yelling at us. It's a good place for some fear, you know, or maybe it isn't. Maybe you've done martial arts, but the fear is just there. But we can't retrain our nervous system if we can't pull back and not judge that our nervous system did what it does.
I am curious. This is realization / question for you. I noticed a couple word choices that came up for both you and I as we were discussing non-judgment. And so I'm curious where this plays in, because you mentioned one of your top values when you were talking about non-judgment, maybe more, but definitely truth was in there. And I noticed when I talked about non-judgment, I talked about one of my top values, curiosity. And so I'm wondering, as we discuss non-judgment, is leaning into our values a mile marker, a topographical landmark that we could use as going, oh, if I'm in my values, maybe that's how I get into non-judgment. Maybe it's a sort of both and. Maybe by getting into non-judgment, I open myself up to my values, or maybe vice versa. By leaning into my values, I pull myself out of judgment. And so I can come from a non-judgment point of view. But I found it really interesting because I feel that we are communicating the same energy in non-judgment, but we're kind of coming at it from our values, which is a little bit of a different space. So do you feel that values plays into non-judgment? Or do you think it's just kind of how we're discussing about it because we're coming from our value optic lens?
That is such a really cool observation. I did not realize that at all, that we had stepped from our values. It could be a way into your values too. If you haven't done that look and you've created the space and the words that come up from you as you talk about non-judgment, maybe that's your value that's in there. And it's the lighter thing. It's the thing you believe. It's the thing that gets you moving. So yes, and Dave, I think it can go either way, but I had not noticed that. Thank you for bringing it up. But yeah, we all have our own lens. And that's another reason non-judgment is so important. Because if I said, no, Dave, it's not about, being curious. It's about finding truth. Then I am still coming from my judgment and my fear and a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. And that's just not the case.
Yeah. Just really interesting. I noticed it towards the end when you were talking. I think it's because we talk so much. Your values sort of came up in your verbiage. Mm-hmm. But then I realized that when I get into non-judgment, when I feel like I am in non-judgment at my current level of understanding, I am really in my curiosity, and vice versa. I notice if I'm having a conversation with somebody and I feel it's not going A, where contextually I feel it would go, or B, I'm getting into my judgment and I'm starting to nitpick where the conversation is going. Either of those situations, if I catch it and I go, oh, if I was curious about this, what question would I ask here? I realize now, putting that into context with non-judgment, that I am coming from non-judgment. Because instead of me trying to force a conversation or steer it in a certain way, I choose to step back, get in a question, and bring a different energy to it. And I often find in my conversations that creates a more generative and maybe sometimes a compassionate view, maybe sometimes not. But I do feel that it gets out of the fear, at least for me internally, because when I step into a question, the fear doesn't have a voice there. Because when I'm in curiosity, there's no reason for fear to be there because I'm not coming at my curiosity from ego, although sometimes I might be, and that's something I got to catch. Again, it's all contextual, right?
Yeah.
But most of the time when I come from my curiosity, it's a question. It's not ego driven. It's genuine. It's compassionate. It's, you're saying this. When you say this, what do you mean by that? Or you brought this up. Can you expand on it a little bit more? And I feel by leaning into those values and qualities that that's how I build my non-judgment muscle.
And listening to you speak about that, I was thinking about my truth and your curiosity. I think they can be both in fear and compassion.
Yeah.
So, and it's when we're trying to control the narrative. So for you, when you're using curious questions to drive them to the answer you want, or me, when I'm already got a truth that I want them to get to, and then I'm coming from more of my fear, more of my, this is the right way, this is the wrong way. But when I'm in my compassion, contextually, I'm looking at their truth and my truth and trying to feel into that greater truth that we're just not aware of. That's when I'm in my compassion. And I have to step out of that judgment of, no, I have all of this experience and I have found these truths to be real universal truths, to step back from that ego and go, no, wait. I don't know. I'm not enlightened. There are things I cannot see in this world, and never will be because I'm in a human body.
And to tie this full circle, this is why it is a play, capital Play mindset, and a practice. The more you practice, the more you get cues on both sides of it. Times when you're leaning in my case, into my values, and I'm trying to come from fear or control, and times when I'm leaning into my curiosity and I'm coming from compassion. And the only way that I build a repertoire on both sides and a context on both sides and a contrast with them is by leaning into situations where the curiosity comes up and having the courage to look at it despite the fear and to find ways to come at it from compassion. It's not that I just, in every situation, I'm like, I'm being curious and in my compassion. No, there are times when I am mid-conversation, I have to be like, I'm not coming from my curiosity compassion. I'm coming from my curiosity fear. I am trying to drive this conversation right now. And where my work is now I recognize it and I can make a choice, which is what we talk about. Compassion gives me the choice. Do I want to stay in my judgment or do I want to try a different approach? And 90% of the time now, I recognize it and I try a different approach just because my own curiosity gets the better of me. And I'm like, oh, all right, this ain't working. What else can I try? And sometimes if I'm, they talk about things like HALT, which is an acronym, hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, or sleepy, or whatever the S is, that can block you. When it's those situations, sometimes the most compassionate response isn't to shift the mindset, it's to disengage from the trigger. And obviously I'm talking about in situations where you can. Sometimes maybe you can't. But again, that's why we build the tool and why this is a muscle and a practice, because there will be situations where maybe we can't change our response. And so learning to have compassion just as much in those instances as when we can learn to change our response is really why it's an infinite game. Because it's not like you made the bad response and instantly you lost. No, you learn from that. Okay, when I make this response, when I make this choice, it doesn't create a non-judgment or a compassionate outcome. Or vice versa, maybe it does. And so now next time that when you lean into it this way, there may be a compassionate outcome the next time. Not a guarantee, because then now that's an expectation and you've just created a new habitual loop. And that's why this is a constant practice, because you meta work through this as you go on and into it, and it just rinses and repeats. So
yeah, and the non-judgment on ourselves is there are times when we're hungry or we're tired or it's just overwhelmed and we make actions that we're not proud of later. And the non-judgment is recognizing in that moment, we did not become present. We did not recognize the feelings in our body. We couldn't react to them. And hey, at least we're noticing it now. If we need to, we can apologize. And regardless, we learn from it and maybe we notice it sooner next time and things grow. So I think we've covered it. Should we challenge?
Yeah, let's hear the challenge.
Start where we're probably more familiar, and that's with our reaction, our fear. Just starting to feel that in our body. When are we contracting, tightening up, getting ready for fight or flight, and noticing that, and then using our tool, just step back a little bit. You don't have to get to compassion. Just notice. Compassion's down the road. It's on the other side. The non-judgment through the practice eventually brings you there. So let your non-judgment not be mad if you're still pissed at yourself or you're pissed at somebody else, because compassion comes later. The non-judgment is, I'm pissed. I didn't do it right. Oh, now I'm thinking that I'm not doing it right. And I'm not supposed to think that I'm not doing it right. Oh, okay. It's all okay. Those are the thoughts. Yeah. But at least I'm not tied up anymore. I've opened up to there's a bigger world. And so that's what I want you to practice this week. Just feel the fear and let all the thoughts of right and wrong come up and allow them to be there. And funny enough, the fact that you're noticing that you're right or wrong is a step towards non-judgment.
I was just going to ask about the noticing. So chef's kiss on that. Great. We'll call this the noticing exercise, the noticing challenge.
Yep.
And as always, thank you guys for listening. Make sure to subscribe wherever you're listening from. Give us a like, drop us a comment. Let us know how you're doing on the challenges or what you're thinking of Play Mindset so far. We've delved into a few tools over the past, this would be 6 weeks or so. And we'd love to get some feedback. How are the tools working for you? Where are you noticing the challenges? Or maybe where are you noticing that you are moving through things like discomfort and non-judgment? And as always, like, subscribe, give us a shout out, share with your friends. And until next time,
see ya.